Hi everyone, I'm Stephen and welcome to Watch Out. And today on the bench I've got this beautiful looking Omega Gents watch from the 1970s, and this is actually my watch. And my aim when I started in this hobby was one day to be good enough to work on this watch, because I've owned this watch for over 20 years and it hasn't run properly for, well, about 20 years or so. So I've been hoping to be able to fix this. I must confess I've already cheated and had a look inside and done a little bit of debugging already just to get my head around what's going on. I wanted to check that it could actually run for a month or so reliably, because it wasn't even doing that. So it has done that, but from what I've seen looking inside of it, it definitely needs a complete tear down and a clean and a reassembly, and there may be some other problems going on with it. So this is in a 1481 movement, and it's supposed to have a quick set, which I never even knew until I googled this. Quick sets never worked. As you can see, there's hardly any clearance on the crown there, so that's problem number one. The quick set can't move like that. So anyway, let's have a look inside. This was a cheaper movement that Omega did. It's kind of meant to be affordable. It was a joint project with Tissot. So the 1481, you'll also see it in some Tissots. So Tissot had a slightly different number. I can't remember what it was, but Google will tell you. So there we see it on the main plate. 1481 is the caliber number. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Yes, it's an entry-level Omega, so it doesn't have the same allure about it as a Constellation or a Seamaster. And you can see that the movement itself is not nearly as decorated as some of the higher end movements might be, but it's still an Omega. So I think it's a good project for this to be my very first Omega that I work on, and it's my Omega. So we've got it out of the case. It came out quite easily, and we need to get the hands off without damaging the dial. The dial's got a few marks on it, but it's a really beautiful dial, lovely sunburst dial. So I use this little plastic bag and these prizing hands. They look pretty awful, my prizing hands, but they work for me, so I use what works for me. And I've got this little plastic box which has got a very thin plastic membrane in it, and I put the hands in there just to keep them safe, get them out of the way, make sure that nothing happens to them. Now, my watchmaker 20 plus years ago, he had a few goes at servicing this watch without much success. He was dying at the time, really sad, the poor guy. He was very sick. I didn't realize how sick he was, but you know, when I see the state of this watch, he must have been really sick. He was just too sick to be working on it. So very sad. He died about 20 years ago, the poor guy. So he did relume the watch for me. So he reloomed the hands and he reloomed the dial, which you can probably see if you look carefully. And he did a pretty good job on that, so that's quite nice. And he fitted a new crown as well, but that might be part of the reason why the quick set doesn't work. Now, in this movement, there aren't actually any screws holding the dial on. As you can see, it just pries off, and then this little plastic spacer ring goes underneath the dial. And there's kind of like these little plastic grommet things, I guess you'd call, that grab onto the pins on the underside and hold the dial in place. So I'll just start getting some of the parts out of the way. That's the dial washer. And now I'll get the crown back in, because it's just much easier to hang on to while you've got the crown and the winding stem in, because it gives you something to hang on to. Fortunately, this movement has that kind of pressure style setting lever, so you don't have to undo a little screw to get the setting lever loosened, which is really nice. Make sure that's properly engaged. And now we've got this plastic spacer ring which spaces it correctly in the case. We just want to get this ring out of here, and then we can start working on the movement itself. Okay, that just comes loose like that, just those two screws holding it on. So now we've got the movement in the movement holder. first thing we can do is get the rotor off. So this is an automatic self-winding movement. And this rotor, it's basically a great big weight. Whoops, throw it on the bench. And we can see that it's got these planetary gears which are part of the way that it works. This allows it to rotate in both directions and still wind the watch. So you can see that's pretty groovy. I would suspect they probably don't come apart, so they need to be cleaned and lubed like that. Okay, we can take the hour wheel off now. And we've got this little plate here. This is holding in place part of the works for the date wheel that you can see there. So I can't get the date wheel out without taking this plate off. And now using my plastic tipped tweezers, I do not want to put any scratches on this date ring. Oops, there it goes. Now, this is the quick set mechanism. Underneath my red probe, you can see there's that pointy tongue, I suppose you call it. That's supposed to be pushing along the date ring one notch, and it's not going nearly far enough to be actually able to do that. So I took it off because it'll go flying otherwise, but you can see that that notch down the bottom where there's that nub in the setting lever, that should be going to the other end of the notch, and it's not. So I think it's something to do with the stem. And this is the other little problem that I saw. See how those teeth are not engaging with the cannon pinion? That is not correct. That should not be able to rotate underneath the cannon pinion like that. Now the motion works were working as you saw, but look at this. I should not be able to push the cannon pinion down like that. So the cannon pinion had sort of worked its way up. So there's something not right there. This intermediate wheel, sometimes they have a chamfer. So I just want to look under magnification just to check, and yes, it does have a chamfer, so it needs to go back the same way, chamfer down. As I disassemble the watch, I think it's always important to think about what each part does, and oops, spring, away it goes, and where it goes, how it reassembles. So this spring covers up, or this plate covers up the jumper mechanism, so that little spring underneath is actually what makes the jumper springy, and then this is the jumper itself. So this is what kind of makes the date ring snap into place on each date, rather than moving around continuously. You basically get 31 preset positions, one for each date, and it's because of those teeth. Alright, I'm going to have a look at what's going on here with this cannon pinion. Do you see that? That looks like wear. So we're looking at this is the shaft from the center wheel coming through the plate, and the cannon pinion force fits onto this. But see that ring right in the middle of it, which looks like wear? And I just wonder if that might have something to do with causing the cannon pinion to ride up the shaft, which it's not supposed to do. If you've got any bright ideas, let me know down in the comments. How would you approach this particular problem? And here's the cannon pinion itself. Now, I know if I just put the movement back together, this problem is going to rear its head, and I'll end up with a non-working watch again. So I'm going to do something that I probably shouldn't, but I figure I've got nothing to lose. So I've got my side cutters here. These are quite blunt, and I'm just going to give this a little bit of a squeeze. Now this is almost certainly not the way to do this. If you know the correct way to do this, let me know down in the comments. There's probably some fancy tool to do it, but I don't have one. So I have actually done this before with success, and I figure the worst I'm going to need is a new cannon pinion. So we'll give it a go. Just gave a little gentle squeeze, or hopefully make it bind, because it could be that it's just too loose. I've had that happen before. You don't want it to be too loose, you don't want it to be too tight. we'll know when we get it all together again. But I'm just putting it back in place just to see that it feels okay, and it does. This won't tell me whether it's going to ride up or not, but anyway, that's my first attempt, and we'll see what happens when we get the movement back together. Alright, so I'm going to continue now with the disassembly, and this is the automatic works. We saw some of the automatic works was actually built into the rotor, and this is the rest of the automatic works that allows that rotor to engage winding the mainspring in one direction. Obviously the spring can only wind up in one direction, so these gears that you see underneath the plate, that's what does that. So these plates usually have a little slot that you can use to get a screwdriver underneath like so, and then you can just prise it loose, because there are almost always locating lugs that will make sure the plate is perfectly aligned, but then they tend to make it a little bit difficult to dislodge the plate. So just give a little prise up. And okay, so now that we've removed the automatic works, what we basically have is a normal watch, what we'd normally expect to see. So I need to let the power out of the watch just by holding the click back, and then I'll be able to release all of the power out of the watch. There we go, and with the power out of the watch, there we go, it stops. Balance is no longer oscillating. So I'm now going to take the balance out of the watch. This is the most fragile part in the watch, and it's also like the heartbeat of the watch. It oscillates at a preset frequency, which is determined by the length of the spring. And the spring, as you can see, is very itty bitty, very fine, very easy to damage. So one's got to be really, really careful with it. I always get a bit terrified when handling this, and that's probably not a bad thing. And so I try to carefully put it down in my parts tray and carefully flip it over, which is always a bit fraught too. Oops. Because I don't want it to sit like that. I want it to sit with the actual pivot sitting in the top jewel. It's now upside down, and I want it to sit there like that. Now that's nice and safe. Okay, with that safely away, we can now remove the pallet fork. Usually the pallet fork has a separate little bridge of its own that holds it in place, like this one does. Often there might be just one screw holding it in. This one has got two screws. So we need to take out these two screws. And a little bit of upward force and it should come out. There we go. Just being careful not to damage the pivots on the pallet fork itself, because it's quite fragile as well, especially those jewels. And goodness gracious me, I don't know if you can see that, but there is a humongous fibre hanging off that right hand stone. So with that there, I'm surprised the watch ran at all, to be honest. You do not want contaminant. And look at that, that's enormous. It's another contaminant. So something that I have really noticed, this watch is full of contamination, or fibres and junk and rubbish. And the oil in it looks pretty terrible as well. You'll see when we get to the keyless works. Anyway, we'll take off the ratchet wheel. So this is the wheel that is on top of the mainspring, and it allows us to wind up the watch. And I want to take this spring out. Oops, it went flying. Didn't fly too far, fortunately. These springs do love to fly away. I was trying to grab hold of it with my stiff tweezers, but it still went flying. And then this is the click. This is what gives you that nice positive ratcheting feel when you wind the watch up. And it literally stops the wheel from unwinding the other way. It will only turn in one direction, which is how you wind the spring up. And there should be a little nub. Yep, there it is. There's a little nub. That's what engages with that spring that went flying. And now we've got this screw here is holding in the barrel bridge. Now this is interesting. I've never seen this before. The other screw for the barrel bridge was actually holding the click in. So I just need to check whether it's possible to get these screws mixed up or whether they're the same or different. They are different, but it's not possible to get them mixed up. So again, this is coming back to that idea of questioning myself as I disassemble the watch. What does this part do? Where does this part come from? And this plate here holds in the crown wheel, and you might have noticed that there's a screw missing already. And that's because the other screw was actually one of the screws for the automatic works. So this is all, I guess, about cost reduction. As I said, this was designed to be a low-cost entry-level Omega movement. So yes, it's got your sort of typical things of a Swiss watch, but you can certainly see some cost savings in it as well. So just those few little things, they've managed to eliminate 2 screws. And also with that plate, usually what you see is the crown wheel is affixed with a single reverse thread screw. That's not what they've done. They've got that plate instead with those 2 screws, so you don't have that great big reverse thread screw that you normally do. Alright, so we'll get these screws out of the way. These are the screws that are holding down the train wheel bridge. So once we take these off, we'll be able to remove that bridge that you can see there and access all of the wheels, which we call the train of wheels. As I usually do, I'm grouping parts by function in my parts tray. Just makes it a lot easier for me to identify what's what. And again, just prise it up with the screwdriver, and now it's loose. I can pick it up. And it's always a good idea to look underneath these. Sometimes I forget to do it. Yeah, look how dirty it is on the side where the crown goes. Sometimes parts can get stuck. Okay, so this is the 4th wheel with the long extended pivot that the second hand goes on. This is the 3rd wheel. This is the escape wheel. You can always tell because of the funny shaped feet. Now we can just pop up the barrel bridge. There it is. And that's the barrel as well. That's where all the power comes from, our spring. Sometimes you think of it being like the spring you're used to seeing that looks like a coiled up spring. That's not what this looks like. As you'll see, it's a completely different idea, but the point is it's a spring principle of metal. Metal has an inherent springiness to it, so it still is a spring. It's just not what you're used to seeing as a spring. Okay, so I've got this little bridge here, and this is holding in the center wheel, which is also the 2nd wheel, as in number 2, not as in seconds of an hour, but the number 2 wheel in the train. But usually we call it the center wheel because it's right in the center of the movement. And attached to the other end of it is the cannon pinion, so we can't get it out until we take the cannon pinion out, and we use this special tool called a cannon pinion removal tool to do that. And now with a gentle push, yep, it just falls out the bottom, and there it is. So this is that wheel that I'm concerned about. We saw it's got that wear where the cannon pinion engages with it. So we may end up having to replace that wheel altogether. I guess theoretically you might be able to do something with a lathe as well. I do not have a lathe, so we won't be doing that. And now we get to the keyless works. This is what allows us to engage the crown and the winding stem with the watch. So, whoops, another spring gone flying. Yeah, you should hold it down with the red probe stick is what I should be doing, because it can easily go flying a lot further than that. And that top plate, that was the setting lever spring. It also tends to hold things in place. So that's the yoke that I just took out, and this is the setting lever itself. It doesn't have a screw holding it in place, as I said. And with that out, now we can just remove the last of the keyless works. The winding stem itself, the sliding clutch, and the winding pinion has fallen down somewhere. There it is. That's the winding pinion. As you explore this hobby and grow in it, it's good to be able to name all of the parts, and I can name most of them, but I can't name this one. I've got no idea what this is. This is something to do with the quick set mechanism. It gives you a really positive feel when you try to push the crown in that extra distance for the quick set mechanism, which, as I said, is not working correctly. But yeah, that's what this Duva is. We'll call it Duva number 1. And then this wheel here is for the date mechanism. So this is attached to the hour wheel, so it will rotate with the hour wheel. You can see it's got a reverse thread screw. You can tell because it had the extra slots in the top of the head to tell it's reverse thread. And see that silver nub there? That's what engages. So that goes around once every 12 hours. And then this wheel here, every second time that wheel rotates, it will push the date ring ahead. Okay, so our main plate is now completely stripped down. So we just need to disassemble the automatic works for cleaning. This gets installed as a sub-assembly, so obviously you don't want the wheels to fall out. So that's why there's that funny little arm there that stops the top wheel, which will actually be the bottom wheel, from falling out. And that little wheel there can only turn in one direction because of that long springy plate there. So this plate comes off, and this is actually what the rotor attaches to. You'll see when we get this off, the shaft that the rotor was on, you're looking at the underside of it. And there we are, that's the shaft that the rotor attaches to. Okay, now we need to disassemble the mainspring. So just push down to get the lid to pop off, and carefully remove that because I don't want it all to go flying in one go. Carefully remove the arbor, which engages with the spring. You can see how black the grease looks inside of this. It's not supposed to look like that at all. So yeah, this definitely wants a clean. Now carefully releasing this one thing at a time, trying to avoid this going completely flying. It went flying a little bit. Usually it goes flying across the room, so I'm glad that didn't happen. And there we go. It's an automatic movement, so the spring slides against the outside wall. And now, having cleaned the barrel, I like to get the barrel reassembled as a separate process. So I tend to clean that separately, which I've done. And I've cleaned the spring itself. I'm not putting in a new spring, I'm putting the same spring back in. And we need to put this special grease in. This is called braking grease. So now we need to get the mainspring wound up again. So I use my mainspring winder for this. Now the problem that I have is that my winders, for whatever reason, they're around the wrong way. There's left-handed and right-handed winders. I'm not sure what mine are, but they're around the wrong way. And that's because of the direction that the hook is. It's got to engage with the hook. So it goes into the winder like this, and it can only wind in one direction because of the orientation of the hook. So this is a problem because this is around the wrong way. So someone suggested on a previous video, I had the same problem on the last video as well, so maybe I've just been unlucky and I've got winders that are around the wrong way for most movements, I don't know. So someone suggested a little trick which I'm going to use, and what I haven't shown you in my video is that it actually took me about 6 goes to get this right. A few little problems that I had. One, you can see that the spring kind of like kept splaying out on the inside, and every time that happened I ended up with a spring that was all bunched up, twisted up inside of the winder. I had to take it apart, take it out again and start again. That happened about 5 times. Quite frankly, it would have been quicker to wind the thing in by hand, which I've done a few times before. So I'm wondering if part of the reason that it's splaying out might be because there's no lubrication on this spring yet. What I normally do is put the lubrication on afterwards. So that might help. I might try that on the next movement. But basically I had to keep on pushing the plunger to stop it from splaying out, which makes it really, really, really painful. But we'll get there in the end. The other thing is that because there's no lubrication on the spring, it is quite difficult to wind it in. So it kind of like winds up to the point where it overcomes the resistance of the barrel, then it will go in a little bit further. Then the same thing happens again. So it doesn't go in a consistent way. And I'm having to apply a huge amount of force. Notice this thing doesn't have a handle either, it just relies on that knurled knob. So I'm actually seriously thinking about getting a new set of mainspring winders. We'll see how I go, because they're certainly not cheap. I won't be buying cheap ones because I just don't think they would work properly. But this has been absolutely painful. You can see it's still wanting to splay out. But it's almost in. Almost in. There we go. So now, because it still wants to splay it, yeah, see, it almost went, almost lost it. Now, without it splaying out, I've got to release the tension so that I can remove the left-hand part of the winder. This is so painful, so absolutely painful. Once it's loose, it should disengage from the hook, and I can remove that. Now, however, this is all around the wrong way. If I put this into the barrel now, it would be wrong, so I need to reverse it. And this is the suggestion someone made on my last video. Thank you so much for that wonderful suggestion, is to do this. So I'm actually now putting it into another winder, the next size up in terms of the winders. And now, because I've done that, it will now be around the right way. What a process, eh? There we go. I know with the magic of editing I made that look easy, but this was hours of work. It would have been, as I said, a whole lot quicker to wind it in by hand. So we now need to get it into the barrel. And there we go. it's in. Phew, what a relief. Okay, we've got to reinstall the arbor now. It's my stiff tweezers, making sure that the hook is engaged. And so now I apply some of this. This is a special grease for lubricating mainsprings. This is the only place that I use this grease. But you can actually apply this to the spring before installing it. There's like tweezers you can get with little foam pads on them, and you put the oil in the foam pads, then you just drag the spring through the tweezers on the pads. So I'm thinking about getting myself a set of those, because I think it will probably make things a fair bit easier. Okay, so now just a little bit of the medium viscosity oil, just where the arbor engages with the spring and where the barrel lid is going to sit. And now we can put the barrel lid on. This is just a special little plastic tool that just helps one to seat the lid. Like so. And a little bit of the medium viscosity oil. This is the underside. And just mop up the excess with some Rodico. Lubrication is one of those things where you certainly don't want too much because it will tend to attract dust. Okay, so these are all the parts for assembly, and I got my spin clean, but as you can see the big parts baskets won't fit into the spin clean. So I bought some more of the small brass ones, but I think actually what I should have got was some more of the silver. See the 3 silver ones down the bottom? They're pretty cool. I've got a snap-on lid, and they're actually a little bit bigger. Okay, so we need to just remove this spring, which is for the jumper mechanism. Oh no, it just disappeared. Anyway, I'll find that later on. As I just finish off getting ready for the cleaning, I've got a Patreon which supports both of my channels, Audio Nautica and this channel, Watch Out. I'm so thankful to my Patreons for all your support. You might like to consider supporting me there. So we just get the last of these parts into the cleaning baskets. I don't put the springs in really small parts that can go through the holes of the mesh. They will. I've learnt that the hard way. Also, you'll notice that the balance does not go in and the pallet fork does not go in, because the cleaner will soften the shellac that holds the jewels in place, and then you'll be having to redo the shellac. And I've never done that, and I don't want to. So we just get all of these parts into their respective baskets, lids on. And they are still a little bit tall, so I actually can't, there's 3 layers here, but I can't get the 3 layers in, it just won't fit. So that's okay, I don't need the space, I just want to make sure that things aren't going to fall out during the cleaning. And now I've got to find that spring. And can you believe it? There it is. And the way I found it is to turn the lights out, turn all the lights out, and use my hand light. And waving around the hand light, you can pick up the glint. Black light is no good for metal, it's good for jewels. And here we are in the cleaner, in the chrono clean. Sorry, I called it a spin clean before, it's a chrono clean. And it does a pretty good job. This is the second time I've used it. Very happy with it. And so having cleaned all the parts, I need to get this bottom jewel which lives in the main plate. This is for the balance. Some people clean this part at the end. I like to clean it now, just before I begin the reassembly process, because it's just one less thing to worry about. I must confess, this part of doing the jewels is the part that I absolutely hate the most. This is my most hated process of watchmaking, because it is so fiddly, it is so easy to lose a jewel. And this jewel is actually quite tricky because it's quite broad, but it's rounded, and it needs to be the flat side. And the roundedness is very shallow, if that makes any sense at all. Usually they're much more rounded than this. So it has made, I found this one a lot trickier because it's not especially rounded compared to what I've worked with before. So anyway, we need to get that nice little round pool of oil onto the jewel, then get the jewel setting reassembled. And now that that's done, I can begin putting the watch together properly. So I'm going to put the keyless works back in first. Some people have different ways that they go about doing this. So some people recommend doing the train wheel first. I know that's what Mark Lovick recommends. I did his course, by the way, which is very, very good, very recommended. But I like to put the keyless works in first. And the reason I like to do that is because it means that the winding stem is in, and I just like to be able to hold on to the watch with the winding stem. So you'll notice that I generally only wear finger cots when I absolutely have to. I don't like finger cots, they're a pain. In a really hot climate like we have here in Australia, you get very hot and sweaty, yucky fingers very quickly. So as long as you don't actually touch the movement, you don't need to be wearing finger cots. Finger cots is for when you're going to be touching the movement and you don't want to be leaving finger marks on the movement. So I find that I generally hang on to it when I need to turn it over with the crown. So by getting the keyless works in place at the very beginning, it just means I've got something to hang on to the watch with. So this is the setting lever, and it just sits in that hole. Put a little bit of lubrication on there before we put it into place. And we had the winding pinion and the sliding clutch. The stem actually goes through them. And this is my mystery part number 1, which again, I'm not exactly sure what it does, but I know that when you try to push the crown in, it gives you a really positive resistance. So I think it's something to do with the quick set mechanism. So I just put it back the way I found it. Okay, so some of the medium viscosity oil on this post, because the yoke is going to sit on this post and it engages with the sliding clutch. It's actually what slides the sliding clutch under spring pressure with the yoke spring. So just got a bit of excess grease there that we need to mop up. It's very good practice to not leave bits of excess grease lying around or oil, because they will attract contaminants. So I need to get the yoke spring in. This spring has got an awful lot of spring tension on it, much more than I'm used to having seen before. So I'm using this piece of Rodico just to hold the end of it. So this means that it will not go flying away should I kind of lose the spring. I've already spent an hour crawling around on the floor looking for another spring. I do not want to do it again. And that seems to have worked, so yeah, can take the Rodico away, just grab any bits of Rodico that got stuck there, and that's in place. So just a little bit of lubrication where that touches, and then I like to get this is the setting lever spring, but usually the spring, it's got like a great big plate as well. On the left hand side you can see there's a big plate, and it kind of holds all the parts in place so they can't go anywhere. So with this in place, that yoke spring can't go flying. So that's why I like to get it in as soon as possible. One thing I've noticed is that across various movements, even across different manufacturers, there are things that kind of seem to be standard. So you'll see that this screw, it has a very, very broad screw, but notice how it's not shiny. Most of the screws have a shiny head, This one does not have a shiny head, and that's a mistake that I made on the last movement that I worked on. Is I actually put this screw in a different place, and so I think this is seems to be a bit of a standard giveaway that this is where it goes, in that it has the non-shiny head, which indicates that it's for the setting lever spring. So we just need to get the parts all correctly engaged, and once that's done I can then nip up the screw. You can probably see the spring tension that everything is under there. That's what's going to give us that really nice positive feeling when we pull the crown in and out like this. Look at that. And you can see the yoke underneath. We talked it snapping back and forth, and that's actually making the sliding clutch move back and forth. But it is all very tight because there's no grease yet, and it's amazing how much difference, how much smoother it feels when we get this little bit of grease in place. That's just because of the sheer amount of tension, a huge amount of tension on these parts metal to metal. So we get some grease on these contact surfaces where you have metal parts sliding against one another, and it makes a tremendous difference in how the parts will work. So now with the keyless works done, we can actually begin installing the train of wheels. And so this is the center wheel, which is the second wheel in the train, and it needs to go up this way because those teeth you can see in the center, they are going to be driven by the mainspring barrel. So we just sit that in place, and then we've got this bridge here which just sits there like that, and this will hold this wheel in place. And it's done like this because the fourth wheel is going to go through the middle of that second wheel. So it's really important as you're assembling the train of wheels to make sure that everything can function as you do so. It's important with everything, but especially with the train of wheels, because it's so easy to damage something if you just bang all the screws in, tighten them up, and something is not sitting properly, then you'll damage the wheel, and once that's done, really you'll need to replace the wheel as the only option you have. So I'm just applying some lubrication to this as we go, medium viscosity oil. And now we can install the mainspring barrel, some of the medium viscosity oil on the underside of that. And that's going to sit down in here, goes through that hole on the main plate. Yep, so that goes like that. And just make sure it engages with the center wheel, like so. And so this has a separate bridge. This is called the barrel bridge because it holds down the barrel. And we need to get this installed because it's just going to hold this in place. We need the wheels to be engaged to one another and not going anywhere as we start to put things back together. So usually for a barrel bridge there's just 2 or sometimes 3 screws. But you'll recall this one's a bit unusual, or I think it's unusual anyway. Bit of medium viscosity oil on the top side, or already the bottom side, remember. The other screw also holds the click in. Now I really do not like the idea of proceeding with just one screw holding this in place. So I want to get the click installed as well. So the ratchet is part of that, essentially, because the ratchet wheel is what's going to stop this spring from flying away, and you know how terrified I am of springs flying away, and rightly so. So I'm going to get this spring in, then when it's in place, as quickly as possible, I'm going to get the ratchet wheel on top. Because that's the only thing that's going to stop it from flying away. Right, so the click itself is going to sit on here and the click needs to rotate. So that's why I'm applying some of the medium viscosity oil. And the end of the spring is going to engage with the nub on the click itself. So if we just get this in place, it means I can then put the screw in, which is different to all the other screws. Yeah, there's that nub. And it needs to engage with the teeth of the ratchet wheel as well. And now we can get this screw into place. So just a little bit of oil underneath the head of this screw because it's got to rotate underneath that. And now we can get it nipped up. More appropriately sized screwdriver just to finish the nipping up. Okay, so now we can just properly tighten down the ratchet wheel, which means I've got to hold it with my stiff tweezers. And that is what it's supposed to do. Okay, so with that in place, that bridge is not going to go anywhere. And so just continuing on with the train of wheels assembly, this is the third wheel, which is a bit tricky because you can't actually see the jewel where the bottom pinion needs to go through, but that's okay. And then this is the fourth wheel, and it has that long extended pivot. The second hand is actually going to attach directly to that pivot. So this goes through the center of the center wheel. Oh. And that's not right. So guess what? Now I've got to backtrack on my work. Don't worry, this does happen from time to time. So clearly I should have installed this prior to putting the ratchet wheel on. So now I'm going to have to take it off again, being very careful to make sure that that click spring does not go flying, because that's what I'm terrified of. So we'll just carefully pop these out. And now with the fourth wheel underneath the ratchet wheel, which is where it's supposed to be, I can put the ratchet back in place. Right, so now we'll get the escape wheel into place. And usually there's a little slot that it slides into kind of underneath. There we go, in there. Just get it to sit into its jewel. Okay, so now we want to put the train wheel bridge on. Now if we get all of the pivots perfectly lined up, it is theoretically possible to drop this on top and everything will just go into the holes. But usually it's the escape wheel tends to flop around because there's not very much to hold it in place. So I usually find that it is easiest just to not worry too much and just work with what I get. And then just with my fine tweezers is just physically manipulate the wheels, physically manipulate the pivots until they're in place. And usually what I find happens is if I manipulate the escape wheel, which is what I'm doing now, if you look carefully you can see the top of the pivot through the jewel. If I just manipulate it, eventually, without a huge amount of effort, it will pop into the hole. Not quite, not quite. There. Did you see the plate drop down? Usually there'll be one pivot holding the whole plate up, and now look at that. And once you spin it, the others they'll tend to want to just pop into place if they're not quite right. And then you can tell because they're all spinning, they're all engaged. So now once that's the case, I like to get some screws in as soon as possible because it's so easy just to bump something and it will pop out. So these screws are a little bit recalcitrant, just the way they're shaped. They just don't seem to want to pop too easily into the holes. Throw one away. Oh well, we'll come back to that one. Yeah, they're just strangely shaped, which just makes them a little bit more difficult to pick up. But we'll get there eventually. Okay, get that one in the hole. And now there's the one that we threw away. There it is down there. There we go. So I just get these started now. And I'm not doing that all the way because I need to make sure that one of the pivots hasn't popped out, because it would be very easy to destroy one. So I can just wind them all like this. Yep, they're all spinning. And so when I'm certain that they are correctly aligned, then I can nip the screws up or secure the train wheel bridge. Yep, make sure they're still functioning, and they are. Okay, so this is the crown wheel. And because this part has to rotate underneath that top plate, I'm just going to put a little bit of medium viscosity oil. Now, most watch movements come with an oiling chart. And the oiling chart tells you what points to oil and what oil to use. I must confess I've never used an oiling chart because I just work on a rule of thumb. And I just picked up the rule of thumb just by watching what other people do. And the rule of thumb is that the lightest viscosity oil goes on things that rotate the fastest. So that's basically the fourth wheel and the escape wheel. They get the lightest viscosity oil. Everything else that rotates gets the medium viscosity oil, and things that slide get the blue grease. So that's the general principle. It's not an absolute hard and fast rule, but it's a general principle. So we put this screw in. You might recall from the disassembly that the other screw actually comes from the automatic works. So I did have to go and review my footage to work out which screw was the one that goes in. And now we can begin lubricating the movement now that I've got the train of wheels in place. And so just to save me from having to turn the movement over in the movement holder, I'm actually lubricating these jewels just by holding it upside down, which works perfectly fine. And now I'm moving over to the top side. So this is the escape wheel, lightest viscosity oil. Medium viscosity oil. This is the third wheel. We're not trying to fill the cups up, it's just a very moderate amount of oil. And the lightest viscosity oil, this is the fourth wheel, which goes through the middle of the center wheel. And it's a fairly large pinion, so I wasn't happy with the amount of oil that went on in the first go. So I put a little bit more on and just mop up the excess. And now the pallet fork. Once the pallet fork is in, we will be able to put some wind into the watch. This is actually what stops the watch from unwinding and releases a little bit of power every time it rocks back and forth. So we need to get this engaged into its jewel hole. And it always goes so that there's a little cup formed for the jewel to sit in the balance. So there's like that bar you can see in the middle sticking out. That is always on the bottom side, because you would just imagine a round jewel. The jewel is literally going to sit on top of that bar in between those two prongs, and that jewel swinging back and forth, that is what is going to move the pallet fork back and forth, which is how we essentially unwind the watch, is how we keep time, by letting out a tiny little bit of power every time that arm is knocked by the balance. So we just need to get our pallet fork bridge back in place, and I'm finding this a little bit tricky. It's like these locating lugs are a little bit too big, is the phrase, because it doesn't want to quite locate properly, and so I found that the pallet fork popped out of its pivot. I had it lined up and then it popped out. So I'm having to hold it down, physically using the tweezers to manipulate it to get it to go into the jewel hole. Now holding it down, I just need to nip these screws up, because if I let go with my red stick, it will probably pop out of the hole again. And then if I screwed these down, I would destroy the pallet fork. So with that installed, I can now put some wind into the watch, which literally means I'm winding up the spring. And with some wind in the spring, when I do this, there, see how it snaps over to the other position? That's exactly what it's supposed to do. So basically, if it doesn't do that, there is a problem. So having identified now that it does do that, We can put some more wind into the watch. And now we need to oil the end stones. Now what we're actually trying to do is not to oil the end stones. What we're wanting to do is oil the feet of the escape wheel. But by putting a blob of oil on the end stone and then advancing the escape wheel like this through 5 of its teeth, we will lubricate those teeth. Now we put some more of this oil. This is a special oil that is used only here, just for lubricating these pallet end stones. We put another blob on, and it's quite difficult. Yeah, that's still too much. It's quite difficult sometimes to control the amount of oil. A lot of it's just practice and technique. We don't want too much because otherwise we'll make a big mess. So we're going to blob of oil there, and now we can advance again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and now one more time and we'll be done. Now the reason I'm doing this now, I'm doing this very carefully. What some people do after having done this is they will actually take the pallet fork out again and clean it. And some people, what they'll do is they'll install a balance at this point just to make sure that the watch is running properly. Then they take the balance out and they take the pallet fork out and clean it. But I don't want to do that because it's just extra steps, and I found just being really careful controlling the amount of oil, you can do this without making a huge mess, which means that I don't need to take the pallet fork out and clean it. Incidentally, you may have noticed that I did not apply oil to the pivots of the pallet fork. They generally say that you should not do that, that it will actually cause drag and slow the movement down. So that's the only place that I can think of that we actually don't apply any oil to those pivots that are in a stone. So this used to be the operation that terrified me the most. I'm feeling a lot more confident in my work now, having done a few movements, so this doesn't terrify me as much as it used to, which is a good thing, I guess. So we need to locate the bottom pivot so that it sits into that hole. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to locate it and then rotate towards the right so that the impulse jewel will rotate around and go into that little cup that we talked about. That's what we need to happen, is it has to engage in that cup. If it doesn't engage in the cup, then the watch cannot run. So we rotate this around like this and hopefully it will engage in the cup. If it does, the watch should start running. And usually it would have started running by now. I'll give it a little bit of sometimes it just needs a little tap, but no, that's not going to run. So when this happens, we basically just have to take the balance out and try again. What can happen sometimes is just in the processing of putting it in, if it knocks the pallet fork, yeah, you can see it's been knocked. So now it's in the left-hand position, and in that position, it's impossible to engage the impulse stone. So it needs to be there. When the impulse stone is rotating around to the left, it will go into that little bucket. But if the bucket is down, it can't go into the bucket. So we just had to reset the pallet fork and we'll try again. That felt, oh, there we go, bang, she's kicked up straight away. It felt better. You could sort of see the wheel sort of surging around as I rotated the balance, which is usually an indication that it's happy. So that kicks straight up, so I'm going to get the screw into this as quickly as possible. and that is actually looking really healthy. So remember, this watch is actually now fully lubricated apart from that top jewel in the balance. That has not been lubricated. We're going to do that now, but everything else has been lubricated. So we're not going to pick up any extra amplitude from lubrication and whatnots, except for this one jewel. Now, normally I pull this out with a bit of Rodico, but just because I could actually see it sticking up in a little lip there, I just grabbed it with my tweezers. Into the one dip it goes, which is a special solvent for cleaning jewels. Just give it a good swish around. And when I'm certain that they are spotlessly clean, we want a drop of the finest viscosity oil, the lightest oil. This is so fiddly. It's so hard to grab hold of this jewel because it's so shallow. I mentioned it doesn't have very much of a curve on it, which makes it much harder to grab hold of. So that's not the most ideal pool of oil in the world, but I'm going to go with it because this thing is just proving so tricky to grab hold of. So now we need to reassemble the jewel. And the surface tension of the oil will basically suck these two parts together. I've just got to drop this on. Yep, centered. Because if I drop it wrongly, then it won't work and I'll have to try again. So just picking that up, I could see that the bottom stone came with it. So now we want to get this back into the balance. Notice how I move the work to the jewel, not the other way around. I find the more I move the tweezers around, the more chance there is of dropping something. This is where the fine motor control is so important. And the hardest part is rotating it, turning it upside down without dropping it. You might have also noticed the watch has actually stopped. The reason it stopped is because there's a dirty great big fibre that somehow or other got in underneath the fourth wheel, and every now and then it got stuck into the teeth that engage with the third wheel. So I actually on camera had to partially disassemble the trainer wheels to be able to remove that fibre. I could see it on the microscope, but I couldn't reach it. So I just had to take a few parts out to be able to get that fibre. But that is the risk of contamination. You've really got to make sure contaminants don't get into the movement. So now we're moving on to the other side of the movement, and we put on that intermediate wheel, which you recall has got that chamfer which has to go down. And I was about to put the minute wheel in, but then I remembered I hadn't put the cannon pinion back in. So the cannon pinion needs to go back on. Stiff tweezers, bang. And I mentioned I've got a concern about whether there might be a problem with this. Only time will tell. So now the minute wheel can go back in place. And there we see that the motion works, connecting the crown through to the time setting position. Motion works is working. Now this cross piece is what turns the date wheel. And I noticed in the cleaning process that it was broken. So I've actually purchased a new one because it's meant to be spring loaded and the spring on the old one was broken. So I've got that shiny new part, and because it's a new part it needs to be lubricated, so we put it into the Lubetta. And just a little bit of the medium viscosity oil where this part is going to sit. And let's get it in place. And this is the wheel that connects the hour wheel through to that cross piece, which actually drives the date wheel. And we want some lubrication on this because this has got to rotate underneath the screw that secures it. And this screw is reverse thread. We know that because we've got those extra slots in the top of the head. So it's lefty tighty. Get that nice and tight. And now just a little bit of lubrication onto the cannon pinion. This is where our wheel is going to go. And we just need to get all these teeth aligned. It's got a couple of different wheels that it's got to mesh with. And it's being a bit recalcitrant, so sometimes we just have to give it a little bit of downward pressure and then move the other wheel. That's better. So now we should see that crosspiece should rotate. When our silver nub comes around, here it comes. There. And back the other way. Yep, that's what we want to see. Fabulous. Okay, so we need to get to this spring back in place. This is the spring that I spent an hour climbing around on the floor looking for, and it wasn't on the floor, it was across on a bench, because that spring is going to be what operates this jumper. And so just a little bit of lubrication here, because this has got to move back and forth. And it took me a while to work out how this is supposed to work, as to how to actually put this plate on with the spring engaged. See, I've got the left hand part engaged, then drag the right hand part down, and now the spring is engaged with the jumper. Like so. Just a bit of a trick, but it took me a while, as I say, to work that out. So with that in place, we want to get the screw in as quickly as we possibly can, so that it doesn't come falling out. There we go. Yep, and that's what the jumper is meant to do. Okay, so this is the automatic works. We need to get this reassembled. So again, some of the medium viscosity oil on rotating parts. And this cover plate is going to hold that wheel in place, and you recall that the rotor attaches to the underside of all of this. So let's get these screws in place. And then this one here has got a little flange, I suppose you call it, on the bottom part of the shaft that stops the wheel from falling out, because we're going to turn this upside down to install it. So there's this arm here, this locking arm that slides over to stop that wheel from falling out. So a little bit of the medium viscosity oil into these jewel holes, mop up the excess, because I can't access them once I put the automatic works in place. So we want to drop the automatic works into place, and we need it to engage. It's going to engage with the crown wheel. It literally winds the crown wheel. And so sometimes we just have to rotate the wheel a little bit to get them to mesh, and then it drops down. And then this screw here, it goes through the crown wheel. I'm thinking possibly part of the reason why they did that is because it actually winds the crown wheel. They want it braced as closely as possible. Whoops, throw the screw away. They want it braced as closely as possible to the crown wheel because that's where it's actually winding. Kind of makes sense, I guess. Right, so let's get these screws nipped up. Starting to look very much like a complete movement now. Bit of the medium viscosity oil on these top pivot holes. And there, see it literally winding the crown wheel. See the crown wheel going around and see the ratchet wheel was going around. So it's winding the watch, which is what it's supposed to do. Now we need to get the date wheel installed. So up the top, the jumper, and then the top part slides underneath that plate. And then when we install this other plate on the bottom side, that will hold it all into position. But we need to get reinstalled the quick set lever, even though it's not working. We're just going to get it installed so that it's in its place. And it might be an activity for another day. I've actually ordered another winding stem. It hasn't arrived yet, but it's the only thing that I can think of. So that is not right. It should be able to go further than that. But that winding stem has not arrived yet, and I want to get this thing back together. Just one screw holds this plate in place. And you can see it sitting over the top of the date wheel. Once this is screwed down, the date wheel can't fall out, come out, whatever. And there we go, see it going down into position. So now as we rotate this, if you look carefully, you'll see that silver knob coming around. Here it comes, here it comes. And bang! See that? See it snap into position beautifully. That's exactly what we want it to do. And if we go around, that's 12 hours. If we keep going, 24 hours. Bang! Beautiful. Okay, so let's get the dial back on. So we've got this little plastic spacer. I really don't like plastic parts in watches, but I guess that's the way of things. I do like not having to worry about dial screws, though. They're such an absolute pain. Okay, and so now we will need to get the rotor reinstalled. This is a bit tricky, but if you look carefully, you'll see that there's a pin just to the left-hand side of the shaft that the rotor sits on. So that pin has got to align with that little jaws, I suppose you'd call them, in the planetary gears. So basically the planetary gears are held in place by that pin. They stay there, but the whole rotor obviously rotates around. So that lines up with that pin, and now this can push down. And once this is pushed down, we can now install this little clip. It just works a little bit like a circlip, but it's just a bit bigger. Bang, into place like that. So now the rotor's not going to fall out, and we want some medium viscosity oil lubricating the rotor. And before we put the hands on, we need this to be at midnight. So that's the point where the date changes over to the next day, and that is there. So we know that at that point it's midnight, so we need to set the hands to 12 o'clock exactly, or as closely as possible, because we want the date obviously to change over at 12 o'clock. So now the minute hand, it also needs to be at the 12 o'clock position. There we go. And the second hand, well, obviously we don't really care that much where the second hand goes, so we just put that in and just give it a bit of a push. Just make sure it's on properly. And look at that. Okay, so this is the plastic spacing ring that holds it into the case, so we just need to get this ring back on. 2 screws that hold it in position. I mean, I know this movement, it's not as elegant as some of the higher end Amiga movements, but it really is a nice movement, I think. I'm pleased that I've worked on this as my first Amiga movement. So we just need to get the stem out so we can get this back into the case. And I've got a brand new strap on as well, a nice Hirsch strap. I bought a bunch of Hirsch straps because I found that pretty much everything else is absolute rubbish. And this had been sitting in the drawer so long that the old strap that was on it, the leather was disintegrating. If it was leather, it probably wasn't. So nice new strap. And into the case, get the stem and crown back in position. There we go. And with that installed, we can now put the case back on. So thank you so much for coming along with me on this journey of restoring this Amiga Cal 1481 movement. I hope you enjoyed my video. Please do subscribe to my channel. I can't tell you how much it means to me. This is a really pretty little movement that I've enjoyed working on very much. I've got a number of other watches sitting on my bench waiting for attention, so turn on that notifications bell so that you'll know when those are up. And don't forget to watch out. Bye for now.